For a lot of people, the fact that you're kind of reunited with the beautiful Arthur Matthews from co-creator of Father Ted is a big deal here. And I kind of looked at this movie thinking, in a way, you're now Father Ted in this particular equation, and Ewan Bremner is Dougal, just given the fact that he's obliviously thick, and you believe you're not so thick.
Well, you could read it like that. I would suggest, with respect, that it is far removed from Father Ted or the Ted dynamic, but not that far removed. No, my character is very straight. Yeah, it is a bit of a turn up for the books, I suppose, in that respect. You know, it's definitely not Father Ted, and it's not sitcom. It's very different territory. You know, it's a very low key sort of offbeat type of movie. I play a fairly cool, laconic character, kind of watchful and wry, and Ewan plays a dopier sort of a character who's kind of physical and kind of loopy.
But did you talk to Ewan about the sort of dynamics of you know, you think of double acts like Lauren Hardy, or you think of, I know you were reading at the time of making the film, you know, Mice and Men, and you felt that there was a sort of a similarity between George and Lenny, and there is always that sort of idea of when you've got two guys going through like an experience like this, the Beckett sort of side of it and all that.
Yeah,
Was there any kind of...
I think all those influences came to bear in it. I mean, you know, I only met Ewan like 3 or 4 days before the movie started. I mean, that's the reality of making low-budget movies in Ireland. You know, you don't have a huge amount of time together. So in that short period of time, you know, you discuss every possibility, and you work it out with the writer and the director, and you know, you bring lots of things to bear in it. I mean, obviously Lauren Hardy's a starting point. Beckett would be another. Without reading too much into that, or you know, without, you know, allowing those references to become too obvious or too kind of clunky. Like I said, for me, Of Mice and Men was certainly a starting point. But when it boils down to it, you know, most of it's there on the page. It's coming from Arthur Matthews' head, and you interpret that as you see it. I think we were very concerned that we didn't want it to be Father Ted, that we wanted to avoid any sort of histrionics or any sort of forced humour in it. Now, you know, while we wanted it to be very funny, that wasn't purely the point of the exercise either. You know, I think Arthur's an awful lot to say about men, about Irish men, about what's going on, about Irish society. You know, I think he's very, very in tune with, like, you know, the crassness and vulgarity of Irish society. He's shown that since his days in Hot Press, you know. He's, but he also has, you know, a great, very highly developed sense of the absurd and the ridiculous as well. And I think that's what comes together in this movie.
Well, there is that a notion. I thought when I was driving in here, I saw an ad for the movie on the side of a bus, and there was incredibly beautiful blue skies, and I thought that could be false advertising, because we're dealing with a quarry in Kildare, and we're dealing with a lot of rain, a lot of misery.
Well, I'm doing my best now to undo that perception. It is very bleak. Be warned. No, it is bleak. The setting is bleak. I mean, it is a hell on earth. That's another very important dimension. You know, you don't want to depress people any more than they're already depressed in the cinema. You want them to come in and enjoy themselves. I mean, the humour, the movie is peppered with humour. You know, it's just that it's not broad. It's not all that broad, or it's not all that kind of intrusive, the humour. And it was very important to try and kind of, you know, be careful about that. You want people to stay with the film for an hour and a half. You know, you want them to follow the journey of these two characters. You know, if it's too kind of flippant or you know, people might just sort of not buy into it in the way they should. I mean, I think you know, the other starting points for this movie would be, you know, the kind of European type of cinema that we all know and love. Mm-hmm. You know, I mean, Arthur's very influenced by you know, Scandinavian art house movies and stuff like that.
Sure.
And obscure Turkish films. You know, so he's coming from a very different place than he was when he was writing Father Ted.
And that's the thing about that. I was watching, and I was aware of that, and I'd read like an interview on set with Arthur, and he's sort of leading towards the sort of European art house, and you think of the, you know, those Belgian films, and that's a very tough balance to get right, especially if you're dealing with a perception that people might walk in thinking this is a comedy. I recognise Ardal's face, I recognise Ewan's face. It's two lads, you know, digging holes and making a famine theme park. This is going to be hilarious, and it's not. It's a
yeah, but you know, like I think it's a kind of it's sort of grown up in a way for us, I think people who've come from sitcom backgrounds and even stand-up backgrounds, you know, it's like, for me, my idea of a comedy film, while I enjoy things like Bruno and you know, more, you know, stuff like Knocked Up or whatever, you know, more obvious mainstream comedies. You know, my idea of a comedy film is an intelligent film with a lot of funny bits in it. Likewise with a novel. I mean, like, I hate comic novels per se, but I love novels that have a lot of humour in them. Say Philip Roth novels or something like that. And I think this film is we made a conscious decision early on that it wasn't going to be an out-and-out comedy. You know, but that you know, we weren't going to spare the comedy if at all possible. But, you know, we had to tell the truth in terms of the story and in terms of the characters' lives. What was my point? I was going to say something incredibly intelligent there.
I doubt it.
No, it was coming. It was coming. It will come. It will come.
No.
What was your question?
Just about the going down the route of the sort of Dardenne brothers and that sort of European art house, and people expecting.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, I think this is where I was coming from. You know, it reminds me of things like The Restraint of Beasts. Do you remember that Magnus Mills novel, which I think might have been turned into a movie, or else it was certainly, I certainly saw a script for it somewhere. Right. And then, or The Music of Chance. Do you remember the Paul Auster one?
Thing with James Spade and
yeah. So I mean, that's the type of thing, and I know the perception might be, because, you know, I was in Father Ted and Arthur wrote Father Ted, that it might be more along those lines, but the fact is, it isn't.
Sure. And see, I'm willing to accept that, and I kind of, you know, I love the idea of what Arthur was aiming for and what you guys were aiming for, but I wasn't now convinced when I watched it that it worked for me. And I don't know whether you was in Edinburgh. I don't know if you were there in Edinburgh at the screening. Whether you can look at it and recognise if it works or not, because, you know, everybody intends to make something good, whether they write a book or a piece of music or whatever, and it doesn't always work.
I take your point, and the only time I've seen it to date is at a cast and crew screening, and I was very pleasantly surprised by it, because, you know, you don't know, certainly at the time, no matter how enjoyable or intense the experience is, you don't know how it's going to turn out. But I think I was quite happy, and I gather from speaking to Arthur and the director and everybody else involved, that we felt that it did actually correspond with what we set out to do. It was roughly, you know, what we had in mind. So from that point of view, I'm absolutely delighted. I mean, there are certain aspects of it that certainly won't work for everybody. I mean, you just know that, you know, it's not that type of movie. It's not going to grab everybody. But it's the type of movie I'd like to watch. If I stumbled upon that movie in Laser, in a DVD shop somewhere, you know, I would be thrilled to find, you know, a little comic gem. And I think the difficulty in sort of selling a movie like this is that, you know, you know, we'd be wrong to overhype it or to oversell it in any way, you know, or to trade too heavily on the Father Ted experience. You know, it is a modest, unassuming movie about disillusionment, you know, with some, you know, trademark Arthur Matthews humour. And
there's no female nudity, which kind of bothered me.
I know. You see, this is the thing. Like, you moviegoers are so, you know, you're trapped in adolescence. You've got
explosions.
There could have been.
A naked woman could have thrown a grenade at least once.
We willfully set out to make a quiet movie with no explosions. You see, you know, like Transformers is going to.
I see a flaw in your plan.
I think there's, you know, there are lots of noisy films if you want noise, and. No, I'm really pleased with the outcome, I have to say, and it did work for me. I relaxed after about 10 or 15 minutes into the movie. I was a little bit concerned at the start, and then I relaxed into it, and, you know, I wasn't too self-conscious, which is always a good thing for an actor, and particularly for a self-conscious man like I am. I enjoyed it. I found it giddy and warm, and I think it did have something to say, you know, despite the fact that it's, you know, an obscure comedy. It had plenty to say. It was satirical. Arthur touched on the crassness and vulgarity of Irish life in lots of ways.
So does Expose, though, when you think about it. I did think, actually, looking at it, as I say, I do love the intent, because for me the best Irish film of the last 10 years is Adam and Paul, and that would be in that sort of vein of, I mean, it seems like a European art house film, but yet, you know, there's humour in there with all that bleakness, and it is like a tragic story at heart, and these people are not wacky, fall-about comedian kind of creations. In terms of your own career, and the idea that you would, I don't know whether you would actually consciously think about the kind of perception that's out there? Because, you know, obviously the TED thing follows you. You had My Hero, you've you know, your Greyfriars Bobby, and you've done other stuff. And I don't know whether you kind of consciously think I need and want to get away from people's possible perception of me, or whether it just doesn't have, you don't have the luxury.
No, you wouldn't believe it if I told you like that. These things really don't prey on my mind at all.
Right.
Like the kind of things, the kind of concerns I have generally are really very little to do with career or anything like that. They're about, you know, will Ireland qualify for the World Cup? That sort of stuff, you know, is the stuff that kind of bothers me. You know, how are my kids getting on at school? That kind of stuff, the day-to-day stuff. The other thing is, you know, when I get up in the morning, you know, I'm not as big a slacker as, you know, my character Miles in the film is. And, you know, as time has gone on, I've become less and less of a slacker in terms of, you know, I am fairly motivated. But my motivation is about, you know, writing stuff, is about expressing myself as clearly as I can. So whether that's in terms of stand-up or in writing more lengthy projects. The film and TV thing, it's not that I can take it or leave it. I love it. And I welcome it. And I welcome the opportunities that I've had to date. And I hopefully will have a lot more opportunities in the future. But it's not something that preys on my mind, or that, you know, I'm not particularly proactive about it, going after things. Oh, I must do this. I must play Indiana Jones before I die. You know, I'm not really that concerned about that. You know, I'm always on the lookout for interesting projects. And, you know, this came along and it was great. And, you know, I'm delighted that I got the chance to play it, and just to try and do something pretty straight, pretty sensible, restrain a lot of my instincts, you know, as a comic and as someone who's used to playing in front of live audiences, you know, and we were doing a quiet, still movie, you know, without noise, without nudity. And,
don't remind me.
You know, and you had, so you know, it was about, so for me, like the technical challenges of that, I'm working with really good, solid actors like you and as well, you know, I mean, you know, that is a huge part of the attraction for me. But like, you know, it's not like, you know, I want to do this or I want to do that. You know, I'm doing a pretty silly sitcom with Arthur later on. You know, we've already shot it and it's coming out later in the year. And so, you know, I'm not hung up about it. I like playing silly characters. I like doing, you know, broader comedies. But, you know, you take each project as it comes, and, you know, you give it what you have in your locker at the time. I think that's what we did with this movie. You know what I mean?
I was thinking, actually, looking over some of the stuff you've done, and I saw Greyfriars Bobby and Coconut Tom. That's based on Dylan Moran, basically, isn't it? A lot of similarities cross over. You know, I just assume that would be your inspiration there. You could use a lot of that.
Absolutely.
Knowing Dylan, I think you could put a lot of stuff into that. The writing as well. You've done novels. I know that the last time I spoke to you, I think you're still working. You're working on a novel right now.
Well, I there's a particular writing project I'm working on now that is not a novel, but the less said the better, probably at this stage.
Right.
But you'd be the first to know.
Are you a secret agent?
I am. Yeah.
I knew it. I just knew by the look of you. What I liked about too when I spoke to you a few months ago is the fact that you're able to recognise too when, you know, something like My Hero, which did very well, 5 seasons, you left it, felt that, you know, you yourself couldn't take it anywhere else, but you kind of accepted that, you know, this was not a classic comedy. It was, you know, it was fine, and the people who watched it, I'm sure, enjoyed it. And that notion, you've said you're not a big careerist, so I'm guessing when it comes to something like that, you're just happy to do the work and happy to
absolutely. In that case, very happy to do the work. I mean, it was also, you're not entirely master of your own destiny. Now, you know, that's something that you always have to be cognizant of as an actor. You know, you are in the lap of the gods a lot of the time, short of writing your own thing. But you know, what was your question again? Sorry.
Oh yeah, it was just about the fact that, you know, you're able to sort of admit that something like My Hero wasn't classic comedy, but you're happy enough that it is.
Yeah, but at the same time, yeah, and I think at the same time, you know, it's a challenge in its own right as well. You know, to make this work, despite the fact that there are things about it that, you know, creatively that, you know, you mightn't be 100% in favour of, but it is what it is, and you gotta do your utmost to make it work as well as it possibly can. The other important point to make, in answer to your question, is that everything can't be a classic. Everything can't be brilliant. You know, if you do 1 or 2 great things in your life, well, that's 1 or 2 things more than, you know, most people.
My interviews are generally classic, though. Generally.
Well, that's what they say. I've heard that before.
Rare that they're not. So.
Well, see, this is part of TV history. For me,
there's exceptions here.
This is one of the highlights of my career. So, you know, this will make up for those years in the sitcom wilderness. But no, I mean, you know, I suppose there is with something like My Hero, for example, you know, which did take 5 years to do, that sort of thing, you know, a regular I wouldn't say on-demanding job, but certainly one where you're in a certain comfort zone. I admit I was in a kind of a comfort zone with that, insofar as it wasn't that long after Father Ted. The character was in pretty much the same area. I was very comfortable in the sitcom milieu, performing in front of the live audience. I very much enjoyed that. I loved the whole sitcom lifestyle, which is quite, I wouldn't say doddle, but it's there's not a huge, it's not that difficult to make a sitcom. I mean, it's very hard to write one and all the rest, but when you're actually down and at it, it's a gentle enough rehearsal period and a live recording. It's not rocket science.
Yeah. And you're getting old too, so you need to take it easy now at this
stage.
Need
to take it easy now at this stage, of course I do.
Armchair stuff.
Yeah.
Probably a pipe now, I'd say, when you're not on set.
Perhaps, yeah.
Maybe a blanket.
Yeah, blanket, I like that. Slippers, yeah.
All important stuff for getting that comedy right.
Oh, yeah.
Very, very quickly, when I spoke to you last year too, you just mentioned, of recent comedy stuff, you kind of said that, for example, 40-Year-Old Virgin, which was huge, you weren't a big fan of that, or are there certain
Not
things
really.
that
Well, I preferred Knocked Up and things like that.
Right.
I just didn't like 40-Year-Old Virgin. I didn't think it was as good as it was cracked up to be.
But given that you are an exceptionally funny man, I don't know whether you do kind of make it your business to try and figure out what's going on out there, or whether it's just whatever happens to, come your way.
I don't know. No, I mean, I like of late, I suppose, something like Flight of the Conchords. I liked its gentle pace. I liked its quirky characters. Whether that's symptomatic of aging or not, I don't know. But it's the noisier, cruder comedies. I'm not a huge fan of. Having said that, I love Borat, and I'm quite looking forward to Bruno. So, sure. But I don't think I make it my business to be totally on top of everything that's happening in comedy, in the comedy world, whether it's in film or stand-up or anywhere else.
Rock and roll. We didn't get you to cry or to get emotional, but maybe next time.
Take a while.